Hello there. I just want to carry on with the Telegraph reporting from yesterday at the Thirlwall inquiry. There's so much coming out day on day now, it's hard to know what to grab onto really, because it's coming out at such a pace. I'll mention a few things after I've looked at further aspects of the reporting from the Telegraph yesterday by Sarah Napton. I know the more comprehensive thing to do would be to go through every part of the actual transcript when it comes out on the Thirlwall website. I'll put a link to that as well. But at the moment, we're just going for the headlines of it, really, about what was said by these doctors that were working at the COCH in 2015, 2016. So it's continuing with Dr. Newby. And she goes on to say, this next section is called, and there's an air of disbelief that Lucy Letby could be harming babies. No, I've done that one. I've just realised I've looked at the last line, so I'm just working through this screen here. Scrub that. That was done yesterday. So the next bit is, there's a feeling among doctors Lucy Letby was always there when babies collapsed and died. That's the headline of this little section. I'll put the link below. Dr. Newby, who is now a clinical director at a different hospital. I think she's at this somebody mentioned something on Twitter today. She's at a hospital. I think, it's just a coincidence perhaps, I think she's at a hospital where Victorina Chua, another nurse, was found guilty some years ago of poisoning patients with insulin. I think that's right. I have to check up on that. I think that's what I was told. That's just maybe a coincidence, but that case in and of itself, like Colin Norris, and Ben Geen, all these cases may all well be, and I'm sure it's quite possible all of them are miscarriages of justice, isn't it? It really is. I think it's likely that there is miscarriages of justice with those other cases as well. Sorry, I'm going off the topic here, but although it's all part of the same thing, isn't it? And it might be that all those convictions begin to fall or be turned over by like dominoes falling, once Lucy Letby is freed, and she will be. So Dr. Newby is a clinical director at a different hospital, said that nobody saw Lucy Letby harming babies, but there was a, quote, feeling she was always there. A feeling, that's the quote. Very similar to what Breary does when he goes and sees Alison Kelly and says, we just feel uncomfortable. It's all feelings, not giving her anything and expecting the nurse manager to say, all right, well, she's gone then. If you feel uncomfortable, she's just gone. And Alison Kelly told Breary in the meeting, we can't do it just because of that. You have to give me something to go on. Is there something wrong with her practice? And they're saying, as Dr. Newby said below yesterday in the previous video that I did about this, that there was nothing wrong with her practice, and she was deemed to be very competent and a very good nurse, which she was, obviously. So there's a feeling that she's always there. However, she accepted. Right, she accepted, that's Dr. Newby accepted that she had not raised concerns when the Care Quality Commission, CQC, inspected the hospital in February 2016. So when they did that in February 2016, I'm just thinking about the timings of this. Okay, yeah, so there was that inspection there. Yeah, nobody said anything to the Care Quality Commission about their thoughts about what was going on at all. I was just thinking about the relationship to the RCPCH report, but they come in September of 2016. Anyway, Dr. Newby said that she had backed consultants, Drs Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jayaram, when they raised their concerns that Lucy Letby could be responsible. There's no time given there, no date given there in terms of when she said she backed them. Was it a gradual thing? Was there a tipping point? Could be responsible, but no evidence to this day. quote, she says, what was happening on the neonatal unit was not normal, she said. Well, what is normal though? What is normal when that place is in chaos? As another consultant said, I'll come back to this other consultant later. It's one that's come up many times. Alison Timmis, who writes to the chief executive, said it's in chaos. No one's listening to us. Who is us? Obviously, it's Alison Timmis and the other doctors, presumably, and the nurses, saying it's in chaos and it's unsafe. The unit's unsafe. But here you've got this other doctor saying, right, but what's happening isn't normal. But Alison Timmis's email to the Tony Chambers, the chief executive at the time, wasn't saying anything about intent harm or somebody being to blame. She was talking about the system as a whole, that they're not functioning, they're dysfunctional. They can't keep up with the high acuity of babies and the lack of staff and the lack of appropriately trained and experienced staff. They're swamped and it's dangerous. And Alison Timmis says in the email, and she writes that in 2015, in late 2015, December I think it was. Yes, I believe it was December. And she says children are going to die because we're in chaos and it's unsafe and nobody's listening to us. And the people are breaking down. So you get these different camps based, it's like these different perceptions going on. So Dr. Newby says what was happening on the neonatal unit was not normal. She goes on to say, everything needed to be considered. So I backed Dr. Brewer and Dr. Jaram in raising concerns. I didn't raise these concerns personally. It's just joining in with the bullies, really. Because they're the most powerful personalities there, I think, more than Gibbs. That's what I'm assuming. It is an assumption, but I think it's likely. It's driven by Brewery with Jayaram as a very close second, and Gibbs is a kind of wishy-washy character that will just fold like a cheap suit as well. And these other ones will just join in. They're just joining in. And as Gibbs says, it ends up being a gang of 7. Quote from Newby, no one had ever seen anything happen, no. It was just a feeling that she was always there. Well, when though? When? For all the crashes? What is a crash? How many of these so-called things that become crashes later happened? It could be well over 100 over that period of time. So was she there for all of those? Well, you wouldn't know, would you? Because it's being... The confirmation bias is in full flood. Because Brewer is choosing it. And other people are feeding into him. And they're feeding into... I was thinking about it last night. There's that idea of the folie à deux between two people, that they get fixated on a completely irrational thing and they just can't... And they're doing it in conjunction. This is a folie à 7 or 5 or 7, however many in the end it was. But it's not really a folly, actually. It's something nasty behind it, like all witch hunts. And there's been some emails come out and released by Thirlwall showing how they're I can't do everything in this video, and I'm at risk of going off the focus here. But there's emails from Brewery to other people here about meetings they've had, internal emails that have been released by Thirlwall, in which they're actually mentioning that this is a potential witch hunt. And then he says after it, well, I'm not saying I'm not up for it. Potential witch hunt, not saying I'm not up for it. I know that he's not meaning that he's saying it is a witch hunt, but that's what it is. And it's not a potential witch hunt, it is a witch hunt. And they're actually aware that they're doing it. And that's in internal emails from Brewery and between Brewery and these other characters here. So nobody saw anything happen. Just a feeling again. Just a feeling that she was always there. Well, there's 19 possibly more deaths across those 2 years. But they're not bothered about 3 deaths in January 2016. They don't end up on the indictment. There's so many strands going on in my mind, and I know in other people's about this. It's hard to try to marshal your thoughts about it, because you know it's a real vortex of strands of intention going on here that's led to this, to construct this, and so much of it is hidden. She goes on to quote Newby, a person being put forward led to this counter-narrative. a person being put forward, i.e. Lucy Letby, well, scapegoated, should we say, led to this counter-narrative that it couldn't possibly be her because she was so lovely. Oh, it's all sort of... She was a competent nurse, yeah, she was, and you destroyed her. So it became an almost adversarial thing. This is very interesting, this bit. She says here, it became almost an adversarial thing that the doctors were accusing the nurses, plural. The doctors were accusing the nurses, and everyone was digging in their position. Quote at the end says, at the time there didn't appear to be any evidence. Well, there wasn't any evidence. There's never been any evidence, ever. You need a nutter like Evans to consolidate this madness and this evil and this witch hunt. He consolidates that. And everything he's done in that trial and everything he's said is breaking down in the full view of the public glare now, with actual experts taking it apart. And he's changing his mind about the method of murder, not on one case, but 3 cases now, according to Dr. Phil Hammond, writing in the Private Eye, who's had an email exchange with Evans, on 3 cases. Over a year after the trial, he just said, well, there's 3 cases which I no longer believe that was the method of murder. But that's what she's been charged, Lucy Letby's been charged and convicted on. He just said, oh no, it was something different now. You got BBC when Lucy Letby wasn't there when the X-ray was taken, that they based the prosecution on for that case. And the other experts like Manarides chime in and say, yeah, you can see the evidence there, and that's the evidence of the air in the stomach from the nasogastral tube. They hung on to that. It got them a murder conviction for it. And now, just like that, blithely, free and easy as you please, oh no, it wasn't those. I changed my mind about it. Changed my mind. Jesus wept. But that's interesting. I think the plural, doctors were accusing the nurses, so plural. But obviously it ends up being with one nurse, doesn't it? You've got this report yesterday. I can't always remember the source of what I've read, but it's via Thirlwall, but the exact day that it was reported. But it's to do with the idea that the nurses were found to be checking rotas in little knots of them, the groups of them around a computer, checking rota to see who was on, concerned that they were going to be pointed at, because they knew the doctors were chatting all this stuff in private, and it was in the atmosphere. Someone's to blame for this. So they think, well, it's not, oh, thank God I wasn't on for all those deaths. Otherwise they'd be pointing at me. What a ghastly, hideous place to be. That these doctors, that's their first port of call. That's how arrogant they are. They don't want to consider that they've failed. And where's Alison Timmis in this? Will she be called by Thirlwall? Or is it all too inconvenient to call the consultant that was there? I don't know if she's still there at COCH. Alison Timmis, who wrote that email, who said it's chaos here, it's unsafe, children are going to die. That's what she said in December 2015. Will they call her to get her to explain what her view was there? Because she's not talking about murderers. She's not talking about serial killers. She's talking about that she realises that it's an unsafe unit. In every aspect of it, it's unsafe. Anyway, at the time, she says, Dr. Newby, there didn't appear to be any evidence. There's never been any evidence, and there isn't any evidence, and there never will be any evidence. But there's a huge amount of evidence of medical malpractice and mistakes, and a complete dysfunctional unit that wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't fit to be able to operate at a level 2, and it was even taking on babies that should have obviously been in a level 3 unit. Such was their acuity. So I'm looking up this reporting from yesterday. They have a lunch break then, and we move on to another doctor now, who's Dr. Newby Saladi, a consultant paediatrician. So this is all from the Thirlwall reporting, as reported by Sarah Napton in the Telegraph yesterday, just the highlights essentially. So Dr. Newby Saladi told the hearing that he initially thought the death of child A may have been related to a maternal health condition. So I believe that's what we're looking at here, is the antiphospholipid syndrome. I think that's right. A lot of people are talking about that on Twitter and elsewhere, and in other reports, that the antibodies to the antiphospholipid syndrome may have been passed on to the child via the placenta, and that can cause, apparently, it can cause these kind of rashes and something called livedo reticularis. So that's another potential for what those rashes may well have been. I'm not saying this, I'm not a medical person, but I'm relaying this to you now in this video from people who are doctors and in various disciplines in a medical field. That they're trained doctors and in various areas. So I'm not making it up, which would be absurd and ridiculous to do. It's just that I know not everyone's. You can't catch everything that's going on at the moment. There's just so much being revealed. Dr. Saladi was present for the birth of twins A and B in June 2015. Doctors had noticed a rash on the babies, and Dr. Saladi said the team had tried to contact specialists in London to find out if the death and collapse may have been because of the mother's health. So those doctors were considering that at the time, but obviously that had to change, didn't it? The mother of the twins had an autoimmune disease, that's the antiphospholipid syndrome, which can increase the incidence of blood clots. This is from the reporting from the Telegraph. Now, Dr. Saladi goes on to say, I did not think the rash I had seen was serious, he told the inquiry. That's the Thirlwall inquiry. He goes on to say, the rash I had seen, based on what was documented in the ward rounds, did not sound very serious. He goes on to say, there are lots of causes for the rash. Some rashes can appear in the newborn period. So he's not saying that rash that he saw in babies A and B had to be a sign of air embolism, which is what it ends up becoming, and it can't be anything else. It ends up being consolidated into that from Breary and Co.'s point of view, and then all the doctors apparently get on board with that, and then Evans confirms it from his point of view. Bowen confirms it. It's just. But here you've got somebody at the time saying, well, no, it could have been any number of things. And we've got this antiphospholipid syndrome and the livedo reticularis, which is a type of rash that can occur and can be sort of moving and flitting. This purpuric rash. Lucy Letby is convicted of murdering child A and attempting to murder child B with an air embolism. Yeah, that's it. So, please, it's just... Dr. Saladi continues. Dr. Saladi said he was concerned that the baby deaths and collapses at the cancer Chester were due to an outbreak of, wait for it, Pseudomonas in the unit. Pseudomonas. When we know that it was put onto the risk register in May 2015, before this first spike, if you will. I know work's been done to say that overall, is it necessarily a spike compared to other hospitals? But certainly in June 2015, there are 3 deaths. And that's unusual in comparison to the last few years, previous years, 2013, 2014. It's almost the same as the full year count for 2014, which I think is 4 from memory. 4 deaths. So yeah, I'm losing my track. 2015. Yeah, they know it's on the unit, on the tabs in May 2015, and naturally he's aware of that. We know he's aware of that. Otherwise, he wouldn't mention it. He wouldn't mention it, would he? Everyone's aware of it. They all know it's there. He said. This is Saladi, Dr. Saladi. For all the taps in the unit, we had filters, and they were growing Pseudomonas from the taps. So they take away, obviously, samples, and they get a culture, and they grow the Pseudomonas. And apparently it's this biofilm that the Pseudomonas bacterium can then create over it, which hides all these other potential nasty and dangerous bacteria. So I've read, so I've been told by people who know about these things. So it's not just the thing in and of itself, it's what else can breed within the biofilm that is created around it. I hope I've got that right. If I haven't, please put me right, anyone who's medical that's listening to this. And he says here, Dr. Saladi, we were thinking it was related to the taps and things like that. Well, yeah, and we still think that now. I think people are realising that we're still thinking that now. But it got thrown away, didn't it? Got thrown away, all that. Disappeared, essentially. There's so much to mention in this video. I don't know when to mention it. I'll mention this bit now. It's the fact that... there's a BBC report out. What's the date? Today. And the headline is, I'll put the link below, Lucy Letby NHS Trust deleted documents, tribunal told. So there's an employment tribunal going on, and Dr. Susan Gilby, who's the CEO who took over from Tony Chambers, and she sort of joined in with the doctors straight away and got on board with them and got in with the murder, the serial killer story straight away. She ends up being, quote unquote, forced out, and she says it was bullying, and now she's bringing a employment tribunal. But it's come out because of this tribunal, Dr. Susan Gilby, the erstwhile CEO, that the Countess of Chester Hospital has deleted, it says here in the BBC report, potentially important evidence ahead of the employment tribunal, including, vitally, documents relevant to the Thirlwall inquiry into the, quote, crimes of Lucy Letby. Obviously, the BBC are still calling them the crimes, aren't they? But crimes that didn't happen, you know. So what else was deleted? What else has been hidden? What else has been lost, in quotes, has been lost conveniently and hidden in relation to Pseudomonas, in relation to checks on bacteria from surfaces and the babies themselves from blood samples, etc. What's been lost and what's been deleted? I wonder. We've got a report here saying that the NHS, we know that they're deleting stuff that's inconvenient to them because of this employment tribunal. But it's also, some of that documentation should be relevant to the Thirlwall inquiry, and that's been deleted. So what else have they deleted in relation to, let's say, infection and Pseudomonas and aspects around that across the years in question? And just to remind you, the FOI I put in, they're not mentioning anything, they're not giving any information about infections or what was found across those 2 years, and they cite the reason for not giving any information on the FOI request to the FOI request, that there's investigations going on, criminal investigations. So it's a complete, they've shut the door on it all. It's an open question. What else have they deleted? What else have they hidden? What else have they conveniently lost that could be exculpatory in terms of medical reasons, the so-called medical model that Dr. Newby was talking about earlier on in this reporting from the Telegraph, that pushes it into the medical model as opposed to the made-up serial killer model. You know, the fable of that, you know, the dark fable that they created for a whole host of reasons, most of which are, well, all of which are self-serving in some way, the doctors, I mean. Got to take a breather. So I've mentioned that. That's important. I'll put the link below about that report. And while I'm at it then, I'll go on to this other report that's come out yesterday. It's from Scotland, but it's still the NHS, of course. And it's a story from, it's a hospital, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital campus in Glasgow. And the headline of this, and it's related to the same period, 2015. This is related to that period. I won't read it all, otherwise I'll lose track of the other stuff I'm doing. But the headline is, doctors told, quote, not to speak up at meetings on infectious bacteria inquiry hears. And the subheading is, this is from STV TV, it's a Scottish channel. The subheading of this article is, the inquiry also heard meetings on potentially infected water supplies were not particularly effective. So there's a clampdown on doctors speaking up about their concerns about infectious bacteria, trying to keep it on the QT, try to hush it up. Just the first line of it. Doctors were told not to speak up during tick box meetings on infections at a hospital, inquiry is heard. It's just another example of a culture in which these sort of things can happen. So if there, why not? And why not at COCH in relation to the infections that were going on? We've also got to keep remembering the very high number of, in 2015 now, the very high number of stillbirths, one of the highest for years either side. I think it's 12 from memory. And then in the following year, it dips right down, but it's a real peak in 2015 for stillbirths at Countess of Chester Hospital. Just carrying on from Dr. Saladi back to the Telegraph reporting. He's saying, we were thinking it was related to the taps, things like that. Risk reports previously leaked. So you have to leak them, you see. They're not giving them out. They're not giving them out willingly. They've got to be leaked by someone who's obviously got concerns about what's happened here, haven't they, to Lucy Letby. Risk reports previously leaked to the Telegraph showed that the bacterium Pseudomonas aeruginosa had colonised taps in the nurseries of the neonatal unit, including intensive care, during 2015 to 2016. So we know it begins at the very earliest, or sorry, but it should be earlier, very latest in May 2015, before this kind of what they might call the indictment period, which starts in June 2015. And then we know that that Pseudomonas is still in that unit well into 2016, into the spring. Okay. Carrying on from this reporting with Dr. Saladi from Thirlwall yesterday, he added, quote, having a few deaths grouped together, it's not unusual, Ms. Saladi says. It's not unusual. And usually, he says, it is some sort of bug or something like that. And we know from other hospitals, there were some in Northern Ireland, Belfast, and there were other ones where Pseudomonas got a grip and babies died and many babies crashed and got ill. But there were deaths in certain other hospitals. Going back, I think, about 2012, 2013, this kind of period. But it happens, and Dr. Saladi knows it. He knows it. It's usually some sort of bug or something like that. He goes on to say, Saladi, we know that in the neonatal unit, deaths can happen, particularly... It's not quite written correctly here, it's just a typo. We know that in the neonatal unit, deaths can happen, particularly if there is any outbreak infection. That's what it should be, if there's any outbreak infection. Just a reminder, we know that they've told us that of the deaths, we don't know exactly how many there were, that are not on the indictment across 2015, 2016, I'm saying there's at least 12, possibly more. But they've acknowledged that at least 4 of those deaths were due to infection. 4 of those. But nobody's concerned about them. Nobody's concerned about in terms of looking at the hospital as a whole. They're just looking, and Thirlwall's not going to be focusing on them. Thirlwall's not focusing on all those other deaths, which are the preponderance of deaths across the period of time. The 7 on the indictment are not the preponderance of deaths. There are at least 12 others. I've got to keep stating that because it's really important. As for crashes, who knows? Anybody's guess is because a crash is just something that Brewery decides is a crash. That's what it is, because they're not formally recorded. And so they're, in truth, in de facto, there could be de facto hundreds of crashes across that year, which would have reached the level of what Brewery is determined to crash for his purpose to build up a dossier, as it were, on Lucy Letby, i.e. just focusing on the ones, not focusing on ones that happen when she's not there, in other words, because they don't get recorded and they never get recorded. But then they become a thing. They become something very much recorded, and as though it's a formal recording of crashes that then gets passed on like a baton to Evans, which then gets passed on to Bowen. All predetermined, all pre-selected, all prejudged, all teed up for the next level from Breary and Co. to call it the police, but the police are really just the segue, are used as the passage, the conduit to Evans. So from Breary and Co to Evans, then to Bowen, it's seamless. They might as well all be in the same room at the same time. They're all on the same page, contemporaneously, effectively. Even though it happens later that it's sent to Bowen, because it's all teed up for her, i.e. all of Evans' choices about which deaths are unexplainable and unexpected, plus his reports. It's all teed up for her to rubber stamp. And it's all teed up for Evans, because he's been given, has he not, the 22-page report that Breary and his chums are prepared for the police when the police come in, before Evans contacts the NCA. But Evans knows anyway, because I think he's had previous interactions with those doctors, so he knows anyway. I've got to slow down. I think he's aware from before. And but anyway, it's obvious that the police are going to pass on that information that they've got from those doctors, because the police acknowledge they're not medical people. They don't know anything. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't know the one end of a stethoscope from the other. They're going to pass that information from those consultants to Evans off the bat, as soon as Evans is on board formally. And what is in that document? It's all the cases that he ends up choosing. I'm surmising that. It's so strange and complex, this, but I'm surmising that is the case. Because they end up being a replica of all the cases, because he doesn't make any mistakes. He doesn't choose cases in which Lucy Letby isn't on duty. Or if he does, they just... And this is what's all behind the curtain that we don't see. If he chooses cases where Lucy Letby is not on duty, then we never hear about that. It gets shut down. But there are trails being left that potentially he did that. And one of the major trails, one of the flags that comes up in respect of that, are the 25 quote-unquote cases he finds in 2018 in a subsequent set of reports, a subsequent set of medical notes that are sent from the hospital. Now, who's chosen those? Matters of concern, and they're not going to be deaths, they're going to be crashes, so-called crashes. Who's chosen those that get sent to him, sent to Evans in 2018? So this is Evans' second lot of reports. Well, it's Breary, isn't it? It's Breary sends him 28 sets of notes with his concerns about what Breary's on the ball again, saying, well, I'm determining this is a crash, and I'm determining this is a suspicious crash. And what does Evans do again? He almost replicates all the choices that Breary's made and does 25 out of 28. Maybe he doesn't do the full 28 for a little bit of plausible deniability, and just carbon copies Breary's and says, yeah, they're all suspicious, Breary. He's saying it to the police, but he's really saying it to Breary. They're all in the same room, existentially, and in truth, they're all effectively in the same room at the same time, working this out, constructing it, building it, letting go of things that are inconvenient. The odd thing about those 25 that he chooses there, the police don't do anything with them. Why? But what it is a marker of is that who's chosen them originally? Breary. And with help from Jairam and others, all these other characters feeding in, saying, oh, I've got one here. Steve Breary. I've got one here, Steve. Add this in. This has got to go to the police, i.e. to Evans. But they're all on the same page. They're all on the same page all the time, all the way through it, constructing this, building it like some poisonous machine of lies, actually. Okay, right. So you're back to Saladi. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a thing there, but it's all relevant, I hope. Well, I believe it is relevant. Of course, it's relevant. But I know I'm veering off into things. Anyway, back to Saladi from the Thirlwall. I'm gonna stop in a minute after I've done this bit. So he's saying, he knew there was a Pseudomonas there. Saladi knew there was this thing here. Thought it was from the taps. He's saying a few deaths grouped together is not unusual. Sorry, I'll have to go back to this thing. January 2016. Well, I guess they thought that wasn't unusual as well. 3 deaths, never end up on the indictment. I don't know whether any of those 3 deaths Breary tried to connect to Lucy Letby in his 22-page report that he gave to the police, and for some reason they get lost. Or that's the stuff we don't know, and that would reveal the construction more and more explicitly. If we knew that the 3 deaths in January 2016, Lucy Letby wasn't on duty for any of them. If we knew that, and that's why nobody looks into them any further. And yet, 3 deaths in 1 month, same as with June 2015, it's the same amount of deaths in 1 month, January 2016, than nearly for the whole year of 2014. But it's like, oh well, but they can't be murders for some reason. But these other ones have to be murders. They can't be murders. They can't be, because they've all got to be explainable, haven't they? Anything they can't pin on Lucy Letby, it's not so much that it is explainable. It has to be, for their formulation, it has to be explainable. And conversely, anything that they are pinning on Lucy Letby must not be explainable, cannot be explainable, even though the pathologist explains it, even though Dr. Jane Horden explains it, even though a second neonatologist, can't remember her name now, second neonatologist explains it, i.e. the cause of death, even though a second forensic pathologist explains those cases. And George Kakai, the original pathologist, explains them. Six out of the 7 that end up on the murder charge sheet, he explains in his postmortems as natural causes. That's backed up by Dr. Jane Horden. It's backed up by she asks for further work to be done on them. It's backed up by a second neonatologist, an actual neonatologist. There aren't any at the COCH. There aren't any. And Evans isn't one. And then it's backed up by another forensic pathologist in another report. But Evans turns over everything. Not just on his own, but in conjunction with Breary and Co.'s suspicions. Their suspicions plus the I don't know what to call it. Evans isn't mad, he's evil. He's not mad, he's evil. He's not incompetent, he's evil. And he's got on board with these disgusting bullies to just ratify and confirm everything. And then Bowen just does the same. That's a domino effect as well. It just does. Nothing stops them because there's no honourable people to stop it. Dr. Ward Platt, if he hadn't have died, he would have been the Dr. Bowen to apparently nod through Evans's reports. And the police are very, very happy not to have any checking mechanism, no genuine checking mechanism. And what would that have looked like? Well, it would have looked like sending all the medical notes for all the deaths. It's difficult now with the crashes because crashes aren't formally recorded. So all the ones that they're choosing as crashes are ones where Breary's already poisoned the well, as it were. Because he's doing it, he's choosing them, and other people are choosing them and giving them to Steve Breary, because they've already focused on Lucy Letby. They're not worried about crashes. They're worried about crashes when Lucy Letby's around. They're not worried about crashes when she's not around. They're not worried about deaths when she's not around. Thirlwall's not worried about deaths when she's not around. The trial in 2023 is not worried about deaths when she's not around. That they can't pin on her. Not worried about crashes. And how many could there be? It's how long is a piece of string? You don't know, because the formulation of what a crash is in Breary's head, and these other doctors to decide. It's got to the ridiculous point where when they go back to Lucy's time at Liverpool Women's Hospital, where they're saying, well, every time a tube came loose, it's got to be her. But you just know that every time a tube came loose from the baby, an intubation tube, a breathing tube, when she's not on duty, well, they won't care about them. It's the same MO over and over and over again. It's so bloody obvious what they're doing and what they've done. And it's just pathetic artifice, really. You can see through it. You can see through the construction of it, the fantasy of it, but that it becomes hardened into something which has got this apparent kind of legitimacy to it, and rigour, but there's no rigour in it, as we're now seeing as each individual case is being blown apart in terms of Evans's evidence. His method of diagnosis by exclusion, i.e., could be summed up by saying, if he doesn't know how a baby died, then the baby's been murdered. If he personally can't work it out, after being retired for 15 years, and obviously not the sharpest person anyway, if he can't work it out, that's got to be murder, isn't it? It's just insane, man. I know I'm going off on a lot of tangents. I was going to start to talk about a drug called ranitidine today. I'll leave that for the next one. Otherwise, it's just too much. Yeah, I'll leave the ranitidine, because that's another thing that's really an issue at hand now. Ranitidine. Trying to remember to do that in the next one. But I want to get through these. I'm not making much headway. I want to get through this reporting from yesterday. Just finish off this section here with relate back to Dr. Saladi and his testimony from Thirlwall yesterday. So he says here, just to remind you, having a few deaths grouped together is not unusual. It's usually some kind of bug or something like that. He goes on to say, this is Saladi, are we missing some bug? So he's carrying on about the same thing. Are we missing some bug? Something else that was happening? That is why we're having this bad phase with more deaths. That's what he says. He's stuck on that at that time. Contemporaneously, he's thinking that's where his head is. It's all about infection. It's all about bugs. It's about Pseudomonas. It's about the taps. And they can't stop it. And they don't stop it. They don't get rid of it. They don't shut the place down. They just carry on taking more high acuity babies, twins, triplets, which increases the risk. Very, very premature babies with lots of conditions, mothers with lots of conditions, and babies that should be in level 3 units. Understaffing, criminal level of understaffing. But they keep taking them and failing the babies and leaving them without antibiotics for 4 hours, for example. That's baby D, and there's an issue about baby D there, which is very interesting from something that's come up today, but I can't put everything all in one. It's just rolling out like a tsunami now. And once Breary and Jairam start giving testimony next week, there's going to be so much more. And then the nurses and nurse managers as well. So it's a flood. It's quite hard to get a grip on it, really, I think but there's so many people doing it now. So many people looking into it. Obviously, I'm a complete lay person, got no professional knowledge in terms of medicine or anything like that whatsoever, but I can relate and put links up and tell you what these people are saying, and you can check it out for yourself. People like Dr. McConville and many others, and Dr. McLachlan in his Law Health Tech was there over a year ago. He was going through every baby on the indictment and saying here are the markers for sepsis for all of them. That was his overall assessment, that it was sepsis all the way through, leading to, in some cases, necrotizing enterocolitis and other issues like that, which are life-threatening. And obviously, lead to deaths in very, very premature babies. Must finish this bit and then I'll stop. Sorry, I think I've been gabbling a bit, but hope it's not too hard to follow. Okay, so he says, are we missing some bug? Saladi says, keeps talking about that. Nicholas de la Peur, KC, counsel for the inquiry, said, quote, none of the investigations came back to say that that was the explanation for the cluster, did they? And see, just like before, we said you have to get back to the idea that there's no medical model, there's no medical reason for it. Dr. Murthy says that is correct. That is correct. But what are investigations? Well, one of the things they are, and this is being discussed by doctors and medical people and scientists on Twitter right now, is that sepsis can often be missed on these blood cultures, on these blood samples where they try to grow a culture. It can be a false negative. It's very common for it to be a false negative, i.e. that there is sepsis there, but the blood test, the blood culture test, gives the appearance as though there isn't. So that's a very common thing to be aware of. And these are doctors saying that. I'm not making it up. So it's the idea that it's a bit of a coup de grace, or a bit of a to stop the discussion here from this KC, because I think they're all working off an agenda here. Oh no, we mustn't start thinking it was. There's a kind of track, a script going on, and he's hearing Dr. Murthy kind of go off it a bit into Pseudomonas a bit too much. But we need the murder story back, don't we? So he's got to say, well, none of the investigations came back. Well, what are the investigations? And have any been hidden? Have any been deleted? Have any been conveniently lost? As we know from the BBC, that the COCH, that trust, has been deleting documents, deleting evidence that was relevant both to this employment tribunal of the former CEO, but also to Thirlwall, deleting evidence. It's come up today. So really important. Sometimes often people are talking about different percentages, but to the degree that can happen, that blood tests can show a negative when there is actually sepsis, and you've got to look at other clinical signs and not just rely on a blood test, because it can give a false negative. So I'll leave it there. I've rattled on a bit there. Thank you very much for listening. It's just like your mind goes 1,000 miles an hour trying to think, well, I've always felt, yes, there's all the medical and the scientific stuff here, but there's, on the human level, there's the construction of how they've done it, the interpersonal aspects here, the human nature, how groups work, how individuals can pull other people along in their wake, the power dynamics. Power dynamics not just between the doctors and the nurses and the management, but between doctors and other doctors, between someone like Breary, for example, and these other doctors. Certain personality types that can pull other people in their wake, which I think has happened. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it hasn't been too difficult to listen to. Thank you. Bye-bye.